Waitress serves a poorly dressed elderly man. He falls ill and she discovers a secret from his past. Emily was excited on her first day as a waitress at Sunset Diner. At 35 years old and a single mother of two, she saw this opportunity as a fresh start. The restaurant, with its classic charm, was a refuge for the local residents. Early in the morning, as she adjusted the tables, she noticed an elderly man in a wheelchair trying to enter. Without hesitation, she rushed to help him. James, as he introduced himself later, was a gentleman of simple appearance, wearing slightly worn-out clothes. He thanked her with a gentle smile, and Emily felt an immediate connection. As James settled in, Emily served him with the same attention she gave to all her customers. Instead of feeling uncomfortable, James seemed to appreciate the gesture. "Are you new here?" he asked curiously. Emily nodded, explaining that it was her first day. James remarked how hard it was to find such attentive people. With a grateful look, he ordered his usual breakfast, as if he was already a part of the place. With each visit, James' presence became a relief for Emily. He always made a point of being served by her, which made her feel special. Despite his humble appearance, there was something noble in his posture and in the small gestures of courtesy. "You remind me of someone I met a long time ago," he said one day as she served his coffee. Emily laughed, amused by the comparison, but didn't push the subject. What charmed her the most was how he made her feel seen and valued. As the days passed, their friendship grew. James always found a way to bring a bit of light to Emily's day, whether with a funny story or a sincere compliment. "You have a smile that lights up the place," he said once, making her blush. Emily, in turn, began to open up more with him, sharing small stories about her life and her children. Lily and Noah, still young, were the reason for her daily struggle. And although James never asked directly, he always seemed interested in hearing more about them. However, there was an aura of mystery around James. He always spoke about the past with a certain melancholy but never went into details. "I've had my glory days," he would comment with a slight smile. Emily respected his silence but couldn't help wondering what lay behind that distant look. Despite this, their bond grew stronger. James became a regular customer, and Emily always looked forward to his visits. Each new encounter was an opportunity to learn a little more about that mysterious old man. And gradually, Emily began to realize that there was much more to James than he let on. On a weekday, the Sunset Diner was quieter than usual. James, sitting at his usual table, seemed especially thoughtful. Emily noticed his distant gaze and, with a gentle smile, approached to see if he needed anything. "You seem to be in another world today," she commented, trying to start a conversation. James sighed, and after a moment of silence, he began to speak. "There are things that time doesn't erase, Emily," he said with a veiled sadness. Intrigued, Emily sat down at the table, sensing that the moment was special. James, with a trembling voice, began to tell his story. He had been a successful businessman, the owner of a large company that supplied construction materials. "I had everything money could buy," he shared, "but none of it mattered." He then revealed the event that changed his life forever: the death of his wife and daughter in a tragic car accident. Emily felt a tightness in her chest upon hearing this, trying to imagine the pain he carried. James continued, explaining that after the accident, his life fell apart. He isolated himself from the world, unable to cope with the loss. "I lost my family, and with them, I lost my will to live," he confessed, his eyes filled with tears. Emily, touched by his vulnerability, held his hand for a brief moment. "I'm so sorry, James. I can't even imagine what you went through," she said sincerely. The old man nodded, appreciating the gesture of empathy. The conversation continued, and James spoke about how, after the accident, his company began to fail. He distanced himself from the business, unable to keep everything under control. "All that's left is what you see now," he said, pointing to himself. Emily realized that the man before her was not just any elderly man. He was someone who had lived and lost so much. This made her feel a deep respect and an even greater connection with him. As James shared his story, A sense of camaraderie grew between them. Emily felt that he considered her a confidant, someone he could trust with his secrets. "You know, Emily, seeing you here reminds me of my daughter," he said, with a melancholic smile. She also had a kind soul. These words touched Emily deeply, who now better understood the nuances behind James' behavior. James' account brought a new dimension to their friendship. Emily felt privileged that he had shared his story with her. "Thank you for listening," he said, visibly relieved to have opened up. Emily smiled, assuring him that she would always be there to listen to whatever he had to say. From that day on, their friendship gained a new depth, marked by a mutual understanding of life's hardships. Even with the revelation of his painful past, James never lost his sense of humor. He continued to frequent the Sunset Diner, bringing joy and sometimes a bit of melancholy to the atmosphere. Emily, in turn, began to look at him with new eyes, knowing that behind that simple facade lay a rich and complex life story. It was a busy afternoon at Sunset Diner, and Emily was rushing around, trying to serve all the customers. James, sitting at his usual table, watched the young waitress with concern. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the dark circles that revealed sleepless nights. When Emily finally managed to catch her breath, she approached James to take his order. He looked her in the eyes and gently asked, "Are you all right, Emily?" Surprised by the question, Emily hesitated before responding. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired," she said, trying to hide her exhaustion. But James wasn't convinced. With a look that showed he had seen much in life, he insisted, "Sometimes, it's good to talk about it. It can help." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the need to confide in someone. "It's hard, you know? Being a single mom, working all the time, and still feeling like it's never enough." James nodded, encouraging her to continue. Emily began to talk about her struggles. She had 2 children, Lily and Noah, who were her reason for living. "I want to give them a better life, but sometimes it seems impossible," she confessed, her voice trembling. James listened attentively without interrupting. "I work hard every day, but the money is never enough. The bills pile up, and I worry about their future." She spoke about her dreams of providing a good education and a comfortable life for her children, but how financial reality made that almost unattainable. Feeling the sincerity in her words, James offered gentle advice. "You're an amazing mother, Emily. I see how hard you work, but sometimes you need to accept help." He mentioned how, even in his life, there were moments when accepting support from others was necessary. Emily smiled, appreciating James' empathy. "You're very kind, James. Sometimes I think I don't know how to thank you for all this," she said, touched. He simply nodded, saying that their friendship was thanks enough. As the conversation continued, James encouraged her not to give up on her dreams. "You're strong, Emily. I know you'll find a way to get through all of this." James' words were comforting, like a warm embrace in the midst of a storm. Emily, feeling a little lighter, thanked him for his constant presence and unconditional support. "It's good to know I have someone I can count on," she admitted, feeling grateful for their unexpected friendship. James, always wise and calm, reminded her that everyone has tough times. "The important thing is not to lose hope," he said, with an encouraging smile. Emily nodded, promising herself that she would continue fighting for her children. The conversation brought a renewed sense of purpose to her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't alone. James was more than just a customer. He was a friend and a mentor. From that day on, Emily began to open up more to James, sharing small details about her life and challenges. And, as always, James was there, with a comforting word or a funny story to lift her spirits. Lily's birthday arrived, bringing with it a mix of joy and apprehension for Emily. She wanted to give her daughter something special, but tight finances didn't allow for any big extravagances. She decided to celebrate at the Sunset Diner, where she could be present even while working. As Lily and Noah played at the table, Emily tried to balance work with the simple celebration. That's when James walked in, carrying a small box wrapped with an elegant ribbon. Emily looked at James with curiosity, not understanding what he had in mind. He approached Lily and, with a warm smile, handed her the gift. "Happy birthday, Lily," he said kindly. The girl, surprised and excited, took the present with trembling hands. Emily, speechless, watched the scene with a mix of surprise and gratitude. James gestured for Lily to open the gift. Carefully, she unwrapped the box, revealing an old book with a worn leather cover. Lily, curious, opened the book, and her eyes lit up. It was a first edition of Alice in Wonderland, her favorite story. "It's beautiful!" she exclaimed, marveling at the illustrations and the delicate yellowed pages. James, smiling, explained, "It was my daughter's favorite book. I thought you might like to have something special." Emily, moved, felt her eyes fill with tears. That generous and unexpected gesture touched her deeply. James continued, now looking directly at Emily. "My daughter loved stories and adventures, just like Lily seems to. I thought it would be a good gift for her." Emily held James' hand, trying to express her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, James. This means so much to us." He simply nodded, downplaying his own generosity. "Lily's happiness is enough for me," he replied humbly. That unexpected gift brought new light to the day. Lily, with the book in her arms, couldn't stop smiling. Noah, curious, also wanted to see the beautiful illustrations. James watched the scene with a tender expression, as if he were reliving precious memories. For Emily, that gesture was more than just a simple gift. It was a demonstration of love and affection that she would never forget. She knew that, in some way, James was trying to fill a void from his past with new moments of joy. The simple celebration turned into a special and unforgettable moment. Emily and the children spent the rest of the afternoon at the diner, flipping through the book and chatting with James. He shared stories about his daughter and how much she loved to read, creating an atmosphere of nostalgia and tenderness. For Emily, that day marked a turning point in their lives. With his generosity, James showed that even in the hardest times, there was room for acts of kindness and love. As the sun set, James said goodbye with a warm smile, promising to return the next day. Emily watched him leave, feeling a wave of gratitude and admiration. That simple and humble man had become an important figure in her and her children's lives. The next morning, the sun shone brightly over the Sunset Diner. Emily was attending to her regular customers when she saw James walk in, as always with a warm smile. He waved to her from afar, but there was something different in his expression. As Emily approached to take his order, she noticed that James looked pale and tired. "Are you all right, James?" she asked, concerned. He nodded slightly, but Emily wasn't convinced. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't ignore. James ordered his usual breakfast, but his voice was lower and more subdued. Emily served him coffee and eggs, keeping a close eye on him. Suddenly, as they were chatting about the day, James clutched his chest, and his face twisted in pain. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Alarmed, Emily shouted for help. "Call an ambulance," she urged a coworker while kneeling beside James, who was now pale and sweating profusely. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly. Customers looked on with concern, and some stood up to see what was happening. The ambulance arrived quickly, and the paramedics began attending to James. Emily held his hand, trying to calm him. "You're going to be okay, James. We're here with you," she said, trying to hide the desperation in her voice. The paramedics worked swiftly to stabilize him, and within minutes, they were ready to take him to the hospital. As the stretcher was loaded into the ambulance, Emily made an impulsive decision. She asked a coworker to cover her shift and followed the vehicle to the hospital. Sitting in the waiting room, her heart felt heavy. Those hours seemed endless. She couldn't stop thinking about all the conversations they'd had, the moments of joy, and the stories shared. James, who had become such an important figure in her life, was now fighting for his. Finally, a doctor appeared with news. "He had a heart attack, but we were able to stabilize him," the doctor explained seriously. Emily felt immediate relief, but she knew the situation was still delicate. "Can I see him?" she asked, anxious. The doctor nodded, explaining that James needed rest, but she could go in for a few minutes. Emily entered the hospital room, her heart pounding. James was lying in bed, pale but conscious. When he saw her, he tried to smile. Emily approached the bed, holding James' hand. "You scared me, you know?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. James took a deep breath and, with difficulty, replied, "Sorry, Emily. I think I overdid it with the coffee." She laughed nervously, appreciating his effort to keep up the humor. "Just don't give us another scare like that, okay?" she asked, tears in her eyes. James nodded, gently squeezing her hand. Despite the scare, there was a sense of peace in the air, as if everything was going to be okay. Time passed slowly as Emily stayed by James' side, watching him drift off to sleep. She knew he needed to rest, but she didn't want to leave. That moment showed her how much James meant, not just as a customer, but as a friend. Emily promised herself that she would stand by him no matter what. And so, the day turned into night, as she reflected on the fragility of life and the importance of being there for the ones we love. James was recovering in the hospital, and Emily made daily visits to ensure he was doing well. During one of these visits, he seemed more introspective than usual. Sitting beside his bed, Emily watched her old friend in silence, waiting for him to begin speaking. After a long sigh, James finally broke the silence. "There's something I need to tell you, Emily," he said with a serious look. Intrigued, Emily leaned forward, attentive to his words. With a choked voice, James began to reveal a painful truth about his past. He had told Emily that his wife and daughter had died in an accident, but now he confessed that the story was more complicated. "My daughter, Eleanor, actually survived the accident," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. Emily was shocked, unable to respond immediately. James continued, explaining that he had been driving under the influence of alcohol on the day of the accident. "It was my fault. I destroyed our family," he confessed, his voice faltering. Emily felt a wave of empathy and sadness for her friend. James explained that after the accident, Eleanor blamed him for her mother's death and the destruction of their lives. "She was right, you know? I failed her," he said, staring at the ceiling, as if trying to find solace in the memories. James recounted how Eleanor had distanced herself from him, unable to forgive what had happened. "We fought, and since then we haven't spoken," he said, the sadness weighing heavily on each word. The revelation left Emily speechless. She had never imagined that James carried such a heavy burden. "Eleanor was everything to me, and I lost her because of my mistakes," he said, his voice trembling. Emily felt an urgent need to console James, but she knew that nothing she could say would erase his suffering. "I'm so sorry, James. I can't even imagine how hard this must be for you," she finally found the words to say. James nodded, grateful for her empathy. Throughout the rest of the conversation, James revealed that he had never been able to forgive himself for what happened. "Sometimes, I feel like living is a punishment," he confessed, looking at his trembling hands. Emily, with tears in her eyes, took his hands and gently squeezed them. "We all make mistakes, James. The important thing is to learn and try to be better," she said, attempting to offer some comfort. James gave a sad but sincere smile, appreciating her effort to ease his pain. James' revelation gave Emily a new understanding of who he really was. She saw the man beyond the regular customer, beyond the generous friend. He was someone who had gone through personal hell and was still trying to find some form of redemption. "You've made a big difference in my life, James, and that shows you're a good man," she said, hoping her words would bring some relief. James just smiled, thankful for her presence. As Emily left the hospital that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. She felt a growing need to help James find peace, perhaps even a reconciliation with his daughter. She knew it would be difficult, but hope was a powerful force. Emily promised herself that she would do everything she could to help James find some form of redemption. With that, she left the hospital with a new purpose, determined to discover more about Eleanor's whereabouts. James was recovering well, and Emily continued to visit him regularly. One afternoon, as they talked about the past and plans for the future, James looked at Emily with a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a while. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words. "Emily, there's something I want to do for you and your children," he began, his voice soft but firm. Emily frowned, curious and a little worried about what was coming next. James explained that despite all the losses and mistakes of the past, he still had considerable financial resources. With a serious tone, he said, "I want to help you and your children, Emily. I want them to have opportunities they might not otherwise have." Emily was shocked, unable to believe what she was hearing. "James, you don't have to do this. Your friendship is already an incredible gift to us," she replied, trying to politely decline. But James insisted, his voice filled with sincerity. "It's not just a matter of wanting to, it's a matter of need," he said with a determined look. He revealed that with the money he still had, he wanted to ensure a good education and medical care for Lily and Noah. "I see in you the strength and dedication of someone who does everything for their children. I want to be a part of that. I want to help ensure they have a bright future," he explained, with a warm smile. Emily was speechless, moved by James' generosity. She knew he saw something special in her family, something he might be trying to redeem from his own past. I don't know what to say, James. It's such generosity," she said, feeling tears welling up. James shook his head, his gaze gentle. "It's the least I can do. You've brought joy into my life in a way I can't express," he responded. James then spoke about how he felt close to Lily and Noah, as if they were the grandchildren he never had. "They have a bright future ahead of them, and I want to be a part of that, even if it's from afar," he said, with a sad smile. Emily nodded, understanding what he meant. James' offer was more than just an act of charity. It was a way for him to connect with the world and find renewed purpose. After a long conversation, Emily finally accepted James' help, with the condition that he didn't feel obligated to do anything beyond his means. "You've already done so much for us, James. I want you to know that your friendship is what we value most," she said, with a genuine smile. James smiled back, pleased to know that his gesture would be appreciated. For him, this was a chance to do something good, to leave a positive mark before time ran out. With that, James arranged everything to ensure that Lily and Noah had access to the best education possible and the necessary medical care. Emily, for her part, felt deeply grateful and at the same time moved by James' kindness. Inspired by James' generosity and his story, Emily felt it was time to act. She couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor, the daughter James had lost in a bitter fight and never managed to reconcile with. Determined to help James find some closure, Emily began searching for Eleanor. She used all the resources at her disposal, from social media to discreet conversations with James' old friends. It was a difficult task, but she was determined to find the daughter James loved so much. Emily discovered that Eleanor had moved to another city shortly after the fight with her father. She gathered enough information to track down her whereabouts, and one day, she decided to travel to find her. With her heart racing, Emily arrived at the small town where Eleanor lived. She knew she was risking a lot by intruding into the life of someone she didn't know, but she believed James deserved one last chance to reconcile with his daughter. After a few hours of searching, she found Eleanor's address. Anxious, Emily approached the modest house and knocked on the door. After a few moments, an elegant woman answered, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Emily introduced herself and explained who she was. "I'm a friend of your father, James," she said, watching Eleanor's reaction. The mention of his name seemed to disarm the woman, who invited her inside. Emily sat on the small couch and began to explain the reason for her visit. She told her about James' health condition and how he had never stopped thinking about his daughter. Eleanor listened attentively, her expression neutral, but Emily could see the pain in her eyes. "He made a lot of mistakes, I know," Emily said, trying to keep her tone gentle. "But he deeply regrets what happened. James never stopped loving you, Eleanor. He just wants a chance to apologize and maybe reconcile." The tension in the air was palpable, and Emily knew she was walking on thin ice. Eleanor took a deep breath, processing all the information. After a silence that felt like an eternity, Eleanor finally spoke. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him," she admitted, her voice trembling. Emily nodded, fully understanding. "No one can force you to, Eleanor, but he's sorry and misses you. I think he just wants you to know that, regardless of anything else." Emily saw a tear roll down Eleanor's cheek, which she quickly wiped away. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily felt a small sense of relief. She knew she couldn't do more than that, but at least she had planted a seed of hope. "He's in the hospital now, recovering," she said before saying goodbye. "If you decide to see him, it would mean a lot to him." With that, Emily left Eleanor's house, feeling a mix of emotions. She had done everything she could, and now fate was in the hands of Eleanor and James. As she drove back to town, she hoped that the love between father and daughter could overcome the past. Back at the Sunset Diner, Emily continued with her routine, waiting for the day Eleanor might show up to see her father. She knew she couldn't force things, but she kept hope alive. Emily believed that sometimes time can heal even the deepest wounds. Now, all that remained was to wait and see if Eleanor would find the strength to forgive her father and perhaps start a new chapter in their lives. The days passed slowly for James, still recovering in the hospital. He spent most of his time reflecting on the past, eagerly awaiting Emily's visits. One late afternoon, while looking out the window of his room, he thought about his daughter Eleanor and how much he longed to see her again. Then he heard a soft knock on the door. Expecting to see Emily, he turned with a tired smile, but instead, he found a familiar figure that left him speechless. Eleanor stood at the entrance, visibly nervous and hesitant. James felt his heart race at the sight of her. After so many years, he blinked, unsure if it was a hallucination or reality. "Eleanor." His voice came out low and trembling. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Hi, Dad," she replied, almost in a whisper. The tension in the air was palpable, and for a few seconds, neither of them knew what to say. The silence was full of all the things left unsaid, the lost years and the shared pain. Tears rolled down James' face as he struggled to find the right words. I don't even know what to say," he began, his voice broken by emotion. Eleanor took a small step forward, still hesitant but determined to face the moment. "I didn't know if I should come, but I needed to see you," she said, her voice equally emotional. James tried to smile, but the guilt and regret weighed heavily on him. "I'm so sorry, my daughter. I'm sorry for everything." Eleanor looked at him, her gaze a mix of pain and compassion. "I'm sorry too, Dad. I'm sorry for the lost time, for the things we said." She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "I just wish things had been different," she confessed, her voice filled with sadness. James nodded, understanding completely. "I failed you in so many ways," he said, trying to find some solace in his sincerity. "But I never stopped loving you." James' words, simple but laden with emotion, touched Eleanor deeply. She approached hesitantly and sat down next to the bed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, absorbing each other's presence after so much time. "I didn't know if I could forgive you," Eleanor admitted finally, "but I think it's time to try." James felt a wave of hope. "I understand. Just the fact that you're here means the world to me." The conversation between father and daughter gradually became easier. They talked about the past, about the good and bad memories, and about how time had changed them both. James felt a lightness in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. He knew there was still a long way to go for a true reconciliation, but that moment was a start. Eleanor, for her part, realized that there might be a chance to rebuild her relationship with her father. As the sun set, Eleanor decided it was time to go. "I'll come back to see you, Dad," she said with a shy smile. James nodded, his heart full of gratitude and hope. "I'll be waiting," he replied emotionally. Eleanor said goodbye with a tight hug, a gesture that meant more to James than any words could express. As she left, James felt lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Eleanor kept her promise to visit James again. Each visit brought a new step toward healing. They spent hours talking, laughing, and sometimes crying together. The barrier of years of pain and resentment began to crumble. Emily, who often watched from afar, felt a quiet joy in seeing father and daughter rebuild their relationship. Every gesture of affection, every sincere word, was a small miracle she witnessed up close. One afternoon, James and Eleanor were discussing old memories. James spoke about the happy times they had before the accident, fondly recalling the laughter and adventures. "I still remember our trip to the park when you insisted on chasing the ducks," he said, smiling nostalgically. Eleanor laughed, a sound that brought tears to James' eyes. "You were so mad because I got all wet," she replied, laughing. It was a laugh that had been forgotten for a long time, but now it became a bridge to the past. Eleanor then brought up a delicate but necessary subject. "I never told you how much I blamed you, Dad, for what happened to Mom, for what happened to us," she began, her voice full of emotion. James listened in silence, understanding her pain. "I know I failed you, Eleanor. All these years, I've blamed myself too," he responded, his voice breaking. Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of her own words. "But now I want to move forward, to forgive and try to build something new," she said, her voice firm but filled with tenderness. James was silent for a moment, absorbing the meaning of what she had said. "Forgiveness is a gift I never thought I deserved, but I thank you from the bottom of my heart," he replied, his eyes filled with tears. Eleanor held James' hand, feeling the connection that had been lost for so long. "Life is too short to hold on to grudges, Dad. I want us to make the most of the time we have," she said with a sincere smile. James nodded, feeling a peace that had long eluded him. Emily, watching from a distance, felt deep satisfaction seeing this reconciliation unfold. She knew that, although the road to full healing was long, this moment was a vital step. James and Eleanor were finally allowing themselves to be a family again. Eleanor's visits became more frequent, and each time she came, she brought a little more hope and love. They began planning small outings like a picnic in the park or a visit to an art exhibit. Simple things, but full of meaning. James seemed to rejuvenate with each day spent with his daughter. There was a lightness in his steps, a sparkle in his eyes that Emily had never seen before. He spoke with enthusiasm about the future, about the moments they could still share. "It's never too late for a new beginning," he said to Emily one day with a hopeful smile. She nodded, knowing he was right. The power of forgiveness and love was giving new life to James and Eleanor. Finally, after months of visits and heartfelt conversations, James and Eleanor decided to formalize their reconciliation with a family celebration. Emily and her children were invited to a small gathering at the park where Eleanor and James used to walk. It was an afternoon of laughter, memories, and promises for the future. The atmosphere was pure joy, and James, sitting beside Eleanor, couldn't hide the happiness radiating from his face. He knew that, although time was limited, the moments they had now were precious and irreplaceable. As the months passed, James' health began to deteriorate rapidly. Despite his efforts to cherish every moment with Eleanor and Emily, time seemed to be slipping away. One day, Emily received a call from the hospital while she was at work. The news was concerning. James had been admitted again, and his condition was critical. She rushed to the hospital, her heart heavy, knowing that the journey might be coming to an end. When she arrived, she found Eleanor already by her father's side, holding his hand. The atmosphere in the room was one of sadness, but also a quiet peace. James, lying in bed, looked frail, but there was a serenity on his face. When Emily entered, he smiled faintly. "You came," he said, his voice weak. Emily nodded, trying to hold back her tears. "Of course, James. We're all here for you," she replied with a caring smile. Eleanor was also visibly emotional, but she tried to stay strong. The three of them spent the next few days by James' side, taking turns to ensure he was never alone. There were shared stories, gentle laughter, and many tears. Despite his weakness, James tried to keep his spirits up. "Remember the book I gave to Lily?" he asked Emily at one point. "Yes," she replied, smiling. "She reads it almost every night." James smiled, content, knowing he had left a lasting mark on someone's life. Eleanor, touched by the moment, gently stroked her father's hand, silently expressing how much he meant to her. On the last day, the room was calm. James knew his time was running out, but there was a quiet acceptance in his eyes. He looked at Eleanor and Emily, his two greatest sources of joy in recent times. "I am grateful for everything," he said with difficulty. "You brought light to my dark days." Eleanor, holding back tears, responded, "And you gave us a second chance to be a family, Dad. I love you." James smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you too, sweetheart. I always have." Emily, feeling the weight of the moment, stepped closer and held James' other hand. "You've been more than a friend to us, James. You are part of our family," she said, her voice trembling. James, with one last effort, squeezed the hands of both women. "You were my miracle," he murmured, closing his eyes slowly. There was a reverent silence in the room as everyone held their breath. And then, with a soft sigh, James passed away, surrounded by love and reconciliation. The sadness in the room was palpable, but there was also a strange sense of relief, a feeling of a mission accomplished. James had found the peace he had long sought, and his passing was marked by love and forgiveness. Eleanor cried silently, knowing she had made peace with her father. Emily, feeling deep gratitude for having had the chance to know and help James, also let her tears flow. The moment was one of sorrow, but also a celebration of life and the bonds that, despite everything, had been restored. After James' passing, Emily and Eleanor supported each other as they arranged the funeral. It was a simple but meaningful event, attended by friends and acquaintances James had made over the years. During the ceremony, Eleanor gave an emotional speech, recalling the good memories and expressing gratitude for the late but powerful reconciliation. Emily, standing beside her children, also felt James' presence, a constant reminder that life, despite all its challenges, is full of precious moments that should be cherished. After the funeral, life began to return to normal for Emily and her family, but James' absence was felt by everyone. A few weeks later, Emily received a letter from James' lawyer. She went to the office, curious and a bit apprehensive. Upon arriving, she was warmly welcomed and led to a room where the lawyer awaited her. "Emily, James left some instructions for me, and it's a pleasure to finally share them with you," the lawyer said, handing her a letter. With trembling hands, Emily opened the letter and began to read. James' familiar handwriting moved her deeply. He started by thanking her and her family for everything they had done for him, for bringing joy and light to his last days. James revealed, with great humility, that he had always been the owner of the Sunset Diner. He had bought the restaurant years ago as a personal refuge after the accident that changed his life. For Emily, it was a shocking revelation, as James had always seemed like just another customer, never showing any special connection to the place. However, the biggest surprise was yet to come. James had decided to leave the Sunset Diner to Emily. He explained that the restaurant was more than just a business. It was a symbol of new opportunities and second chances. "You gave me a second chance to be happy, Emily. Now, I want this place to be yours, so you can continue spreading joy and creating memories with your children and everyone who walks through these doors," the letter read. Emily felt a wave of emotions, from gratitude to a deep sense of responsibility. As she absorbed the news, the lawyer continued explaining the details. James had arranged everything to ensure a smooth transition. He wanted to make sure that you and your children would have a secure future, the lawyer said with a gentle smile. Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was an act of generosity beyond anything she could have imagined. James had not only touched their lives, but he was now ensuring that she could continue to take care of her family. Emily returned to the Sunset Diner with a new perspective. The restaurant, which had already been special to her, became even more significant. With Eleanor's support, who also wanted to be part of this new chapter, Emily began to renovate the place, preserving its classic charm while adding personal touches that reflected James' memory. The diner became an even more welcoming gathering spot, filled with laughter, conversation, and memories. Lily and Noah loved spending time there, helping their mother and engaging with the customers. Eleanor, who had found peace after her father's passing, continued to grow closer to Emily and her children. She became a constant presence at the diner, helping in every way she could and forming a strong bond with Emily's family. Under its new management, the Sunset Diner flourished. It became known not only for its good food, but also for the touching story behind its existence. Customers, both new and old, felt the aura of love and gratitude that permeated the atmosphere. Emily knew that James had left a lasting legacy, not just through the diner but also in the hearts of everyone who knew his story. She would always remember James as a friend and mentor whose kindness and wisdom had forever changed her life. And so, as the sun set over the Sunset Diner, Emily looked to the horizon with hope, ready to embrace the future with the same generosity that James had shown her.